The stuffed lamb arrived in a cardboard box. No note, no explanation, just this ratty toy with one eye missing and wool matted from decades of handling. 37 years ago, I'd given this exact lamb to my sister Meredith on her 8th birthday. Now it was back, a deliberate message after she'd stripped me of everything I'd built over a lifetime. I'm staring at the 4,000 acres of Montana ranch land that used to be mine. Rolling hills dotted with Rambouillet sheep worth millions. The ranch house my grandfather built with his bare hands after returning from World War II. All of it gone now. The Broken Spoke Ranch sign at the gate has been replaced with Whitaker Enterprises. My family name erased like it never existed. 3 months ago, I signed over my entire $4 million ranch to my sister, the culmination of a promise I'd made to our dying father. I thought I was doing right by family. Instead, I ended up living in a one-bedroom rental in town, watching strangers work the land my blood and sweat had nurtured for 40 years. But that stuffed lamb changed everything. Because tucked inside was something Meredith never knew existed, something that would turn the tables on the sister who thought she'd finally won our lifelong battle. Growing up on Broken Spoke Ranch meant understanding your place in the hierarchy from day one. My father, James Whitaker, Big Jim to everyone in Gallatin County, was a third-generation rancher who ruled our family like he managed his livestock, with an iron will and unforgiving standards. Mother died when I was 11 and Meredith just 5, leaving us to navigate Big Jim's world of unspoken expectations and conditional love. Whitakers don't show weakness, he'd say, watching me struggle to control a ram 3 times my size. I was 10 when my arm broke during lambing season. Jim wrapped it in a makeshift splint and had me back working before sundown. Ranch doesn't run itself, Daniel. Pain's just weakness leaving the body. Meredith was different. The only girl in 3 generations of Whitakers, she received a tenderness from Big Jim I never knew existed. When she cried, he comforted her. When she failed, he offered second chances. I watched this special treatment from the shadows of the barn, where I slept many nights after failing to meet his standards. The summer I turned 15, we hosted the county's annual Montana Stock Growers Barbecue. Every ranching family for 50 miles attended. The Hendersons, Millers, Reardons, and others whose bloodlines were as entrenched in the land as their fence posts. I'd spent weeks preparing our prize ram for the Junior Livestock Showcase. The night before, Meredith accidentally left the pen open, and I found my ram halfway to Helena. At the barbecue, standing empty-handed while other boys proudly displayed their livestock, Big Jim announced to everyone, "Guess Daniel here thought beauty sleep was more important than responsibility. Can't trust him with anything of value yet." The laughter from men I desperately wanted to respect me burned worse than the summer sun. That night, I made my first serious money decision. I'd been saving for a truck, $432 hidden in my boot box. Instead, I used it to buy my first independent livestock, 2 pregnant ewes from Old Man Keller's failing operation. I kept them on a forgotten corner of our property, rising before dawn to tend them before my regular chores. Within 3 years, I had 27 sheep of my own and sold enough wool to open my first bank account. Big Jim never acknowledged my side business until my final year of high school when drought hit the county hard. His sheep were suffering and winter feed costs were mounting. Without asking, I sold 15 of my sheep and left the money on his desk, $3,700 that kept Broken Spoke afloat that winter. He never thanked me, but 2 months later he added my name to the lower corner of the ranch sign. That was his version of approval. Meanwhile, Meredith left for college in California and rarely came home. While I stayed, expanding the ranch's operations and modernizing the wool processing, she built a corporate career in San Francisco, occasionally sending gifts that felt more like reminders of the world beyond our fences than genuine connections.
The grand gesture came when Big Jim was diagnosed with aggressive lung cancer last year. 79 years old and still riding fences daily, the news devastated him more for what it meant for the ranch than his own mortality. "I promised your mother the ranch would stay in the family," he told me from his hospital bed. "Both my children need to be taken care of." What he didn't say, what I only discovered later, was that he'd been hiding financial problems for years.
Medical bills were piling up, and back taxes threatened everything we'd built. 2 days before he died, he made me promise, "Make it right with your sister, Daniel. She deserves her share." I took that promise to heart, but what I didn't know was that Big Jim had already set something in motion years earlier, a secret kept in the family Bible that would eventually upend everything I thought I knew about Broken Spoke Ranch. When Big Jim's funeral brought Meredith back to Montana last December, it was the first time she'd set foot on Broken Spoke in 8 years. She arrived in a rented Range Rover, designer sunglasses perched on her head, looking more Silicon Valley executive than daughter of the soil. I'd spent the morning organizing the reception at the Lutheran church where 3 generations of Whitakers had been buried. "The place looks exactly the same," she said, eyeing the weathered barnwood and faded family photos in the ranch house kitchen. "It's like time stopped here." I swallowed my initial response, that someone had to stay and keep things running while she built her life elsewhere. Instead, I honored my promise to Dad. "I've been thinking about what Father would want," I said. "This place was meant for both of us. I'd like to make you an equal partner in Broken Spoke." Her laugh caught me off guard. "Daniel, I have a life in California. What would I do with half a sheep ranch in Montana?" "It's your birthright," I insisted. 4,000 acres, 300 head of premium Rambouillet sheep, equipment, water rights. It's worth about $4 million now. Something shifted in her expression. $4 million? She looked around with new interest. Over the following weeks, Meredith surprised me by extending her stay. She asked endless questions about operations, profit margins, and land values. I mistook this for genuine interest in our heritage. I showed her everything: the breeding records, the water management systems I'd developed, the organic certification I'd secured that doubled our wool prices. By February, we'd settled into an uneasy routine. I handled the ranch work, while Meredith spent hours on her laptop at the kitchen table. When she suggested we formalize our partnership with proper legal documentation, I agreed readily. The promise to Dad weighed heavily on me. The papers she presented came from some high-powered law firm in Bozeman. They were complex, full of legal jargon, but the gist seemed straightforward. We would be equal partners in Broken Spoke Ranch. I signed them at the kitchen table where we'd eaten as children, feeling I'd finally honored Big Jim's wishes. 3 weeks later, Sheriff Dawson arrived with formal papers. What I'd signed wasn't a partnership agreement, but a complete transfer of ownership. Meredith now owned Broken Spoke Ranch outright, and I had 30 days to vacate the premises. "You can't be serious," I said when I confronted her. "This is our family legacy." "It's business, Daniel," she replied, not looking up from her laptop. "Dad always said you were too trusting. Consider this a life lesson." I learned from Dawson that Meredith had already contracted with Whitaker Enterprises, her own company, to convert half the ranch land into luxury vacation properties. "Montana Authentic Ranch Experience" was the tagline on the brochure he'd seen. That night, I sat in Big Jim's study, the room unchanged since my childhood, when every summons there meant judgment for some failure. The leather-bound family Bible sat on his desk where it always had. I'd never been religious, but something drew me to it, perhaps searching for answers or comfort in my father's final possession. When I opened it, several pages had been hollowed out.
Inside was a sealed envelope with my name written in Big Jim's unmistakable block handwriting. The letter read, "Daniel, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and things have gone sideways with your sister. I knew they might. Meredith has her mother's ambition, but not her heart. There's a safe deposit box at First Montana Bank in Bozeman, number 247. The key is taped to the back of this Bible. What's inside will protect you if needed. I wasn't always fair to you, son, but I always saw your worth. Dad." The revelation staggered me. Big Jim had anticipated this betrayal? As I peeled the key from its hiding place, the ranch house door opened. Meredith had returned from her meeting in town. "Planning a trip to Bozeman tomorrow," I told her casually at dinner. "Need anything while I'm there?" "Actually," she said, "I'll need you to start moving your personal belongings. The contractors arrive next Monday to begin renovations." I nodded, forcing down food that tasted like ash. "Just one question, Meredith. Why now?"
After all these years of wanting nothing to do with this place? She set down her fork, studying me with the calculating gaze I'd seen directed at stubborn livestock. 4,000,000 reasons, Daniel, but mostly because I could. You stayed here playing cowboy while I built something real. Now I get to decide what happens to Dad's precious legacy. That night, as I packed photographs and the few possessions I couldn't bear to leave behind, I found the old stuffed lamb in a box of childhood things. I remembered giving it to Meredith on her 8th birthday, the only gift I could afford with my lawn mowing money. Back then, she'd hugged it close, named it Wooly, and declared it her favorite thing ever. I placed it on my nightstand, a reminder of when we were just siblings before ambition and resentment poisoned everything. Tomorrow, I would drive to Bozeman and discover what Big Jim had left me, the final card in a game I hadn't known we were playing. The First Montana Bank in Bozeman hadn't changed since I'd opened my first account there 30 years ago. Same oak counters, same faded photographs of historic Montana on the walls. Martha Lindstrom, whose family had banked alongside Whitaker's for generations, recognized me immediately. "Daniel, haven't seen you in ages. What brings you to town?" "Safe deposit box," I said, showing her the key. "Number 247. Her expression shifted subtly. "Oh, I see. Follow me, please." The metal box contained 3 items: a folder of legal documents, a small leather journal, and a USB drive. I took them to a private room and began reading. The documents revealed the truth Big Jim had hidden from both of us. Broken Spoke Ranch wasn't actually owned by our father. It had been placed in a trust by our grandfather with specific succession terms. The ranch could only transfer to a blood Whitaker who actively worked the land for at least 20 consecutive years. I qualified. Meredith did not. The journal contained entries dating back 30 years, detailing how Big Jim had manipulated both of us, pitting us against each other, nurturing Meredith's resentment while pushing me to prove my worth through sacrifice. The final pages contained his confession and remorse. The USB drive held 2 video files. The first showed Big Jim, gaunt from cancer but clear-eyed, explaining everything. The second was security footage from his hospital room, showing Meredith agreeing to care for me in exchange for his signature on documents he couldn't read through pain-clouded eyes. "She played me for a fool," I whispered to the empty room. That evening, I returned to find Broken Spoke transformed. Catering trucks lined the driveway, and workers were setting up tables on the lawn. A banner across the barn read, "Whitaker Enterprises, Montana Legacy Reimagined." Meredith was hosting potential investors for her development project. I parked behind the barn and entered through the kitchen, where Rosa, our neighbor who helped with large events, was arranging appetizers. "Mr. Daniel, Miss Meredith didn't say you'd be here."
"It's a surprise," I said, helping myself to a server's jacket hanging by the door. For the next hour, I moved through the crowd with trays of drinks, listening as Meredith charmed investors with talk of authentic Montana experiences and preserving the character of this historic property, while promising luxury accommodations and helicopter skiing access. When Sheriff Dawson arrived in uniform, I knew he'd received the documents I'd faxed from Bozeman. He nodded slightly in my direction before approaching Meredith, who was holding court near the old sheep scales we'd used for generations. "Perfect timing, Sheriff," she smiled. "Everyone, this is Sheriff Dawson, whose department will be providing security for our development." "Actually, Miss Whitaker, I'm here on official business," he replied, loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "There seems to be a problem with the property transfer." The confident smile never left her face. "There's been a misunderstanding. We can discuss this privately." "I think here's fine," I said, stepping forward and removing the server's jacket. "Since you've invited all these people to my ranch." The shocked murmurs rippled through the crowd as Meredith's face hardened. "Daniel, don't embarrass yourself. We both know what you signed." "What I signed was obtained through fraud," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "But more importantly, you can't transfer what you don't legally own." I nodded to Sheriff Dawson, who handed her the court order halting any development or transfer of the property pending legal review. This ranch was never Dad's to give or yours to take.
It's held in trust with specific conditions. Conditions only I have met. "This is ridiculous," she hissed. "You can't do this." "I already have," I said, then addressed the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the confusion. Broken Spoke Ranch is not for sale or development. It's a working sheep operation, as it has been for 3 generations and as it will continue to be." As the investors began awkwardly dispersing, Meredith grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my flesh. "You think you've won. I have resources you can't imagine. I'll bury you in legal fees until there's nothing left of this worthless patch of dirt." I removed her hand gently. "There's one more thing you should know. The USB drive in the safe deposit box? It has footage of you manipulating our dying father into signing papers he couldn't read. Fraud and elder abuse are serious charges in Montana." The color drained from her face. "You wouldn't." "I don't want to," I admitted. "Despite everything, you're still my sister. All I want is what's rightfully mine." She stared at me for a long moment before walking away. By midnight, her Range Rover was gone, along with all her belongings. 3 days later, the stuffed lamb arrived in that plain cardboard box. The weeks following the confrontation were quieter than I expected. No lawyers' letters arrived, no sheriff's visits occurred. Meredith had simply vanished back to California, leaving only that stuffed lamb as evidence she'd ever returned to Broken Spoke. I placed Wooly on the mantelpiece above the fireplace, a silent witness to all that had transpired. Something about its lopsided gaze bothered me, though. The missing eye seemed wrong somehow. I remembered it having both when I'd found it among my childhood things. One evening, after a long day vaccinating lambs, I examined the toy more closely. The stitching around the missing eye was fresh, not decades old as it should have been. When I gently probed the opening, I felt something hard inside. Using my pocket knife, I carefully widened the hole and extracted a small metal object. A USB drive, similar to the one Big Jim had left in the safe deposit box. My hands trembled as I plugged it into my laptop. It contained a single audio file, a recorded conversation between Meredith and our father from 6 months before his death. Their voices were clear in the ranch house kitchen. "You've always favored him," Meredith was saying. "That's not true," Big Jim replied, his voice weaker than I remembered. "I was harder on Daniel because the ranch needed him. You were free to follow your own path."
Free? You pushed me away. Everything was always about Daniel and this ranch. Is that why you're doing this? Big Jim asked. Revenge? A pause. Then Meredith's voice softened. No, Dad. I'm doing this because Broken Spoke is the only leverage I have left. My company is failing. The investments didn't pan out. I'm about to lose everything I've built. You should have come to me, our father said, like Daniel did when he needed help. You gave him everything. I gave him responsibility, not freedom. There's a difference. The recording continued for another 40 minutes, revealing a sister I barely recognized. Meredith wasn't the calculated predator I'd imagined, but a desperate woman trying to save her crumbling business empire. The development scheme wasn't malice, it was survival. The following morning, I called Sheriff Dawson to ask about Whitaker Enterprises. His contacts in California confirmed what the recording suggested. Meredith's company was filing for bankruptcy protection. Her investors had pulled out after the Broken Spoke debacle. I found myself driving to Bozeman again, this time to meet with Travis Henderson, whose family had ranched alongside Whitaker's for generations, and who now ran the region's most respected law firm. I need to understand my options, I told him, placing the trust documents on his desk. After reviewing everything, Henderson leaned back in his chair. The trust is ironclad. The ranch is yours, Daniel. Your sister has no legal claim. And if I wanted to change that? His eyebrows rose. That would be complicated, but not impossible. 2 days later, I was on a flight to San Francisco. Meredith's address wasn't hard to find. A modest apartment in Oakland, a far cry from the luxury condo she'd often bragged about in our infrequent conversations over the years. When she opened the door, the shock on her face quickly hardened into defensiveness. Come to gloat? Actually, I came to talk business, I said, holding up the folder of documents I'd brought.
May I come in? Her apartment was nearly empty. A few pieces of furniture, stacks of boxes, walls bare except for a single photograph. Our mother holding both of us on the front porch of Broken Spoke, taken shortly before her death. I found the USB drive in Woolley, I said, after she'd reluctantly offered me coffee in a chipped mug. Figured you might, she replied. Wasn't sure you'd listen to it. I did. All of it. I opened the folder and slid the papers across her small kitchen table. This is my proposal. Broken Spoke Ranch remains intact as a working operation. No development. But we form a separate company, Whitaker Wool, with you as CEO, handling the business end from wherever you choose to live. She stared at the documents, then at me. Why would you do this after what I tried to pull? Because Big Jim was right about one thing. The ranch should support both his children. I'm good with the land and the sheep. You understand markets and business. Together, we might build something better than either of us could alone. You don't trust me, she said. It wasn't a question. Not yet, I agreed, but I'm willing to try. The agreement has safeguards for both of us. For the first time since we were children, I saw Meredith's defensive walls crumble. I was desperate, she admitted. Everything was falling apart. The ranch seemed like my only option. I understand desperation, I said. I've lived with it every time drought hit or wool prices dropped. The difference is, I never had to face it alone. 6 months later, Broken Spoke is thriving in ways I never imagined. Our premium wool now ships directly to high-end textile manufacturers in Europe and Japan, commanding prices that would have astonished Big Jim. Meredith operates from a small office in Bozeman, having sold her California properties to settle her debts. The stuffed lamb, repaired with a new button eye, sits on a shelf in the ranch office we built onto the old house. It's a reminder of how close we came to losing everything, including each other. Last week, while replacing rotted boards in the barn loft, I found another of Big Jim's surprises. A sealed mason jar containing a letter addressed to both of us. The faded paper held just 3 lines in our father's handwriting. The land remembers, even when people forget.
Blood matters less than the work of your hands. Forgiveness is the only legacy worth leaving. I texted a photo of it to Meredith. Her response came minutes later. He was right, about everything. This morning, I watched dawn break over the eastern pastures where new lambs frolic on legs still uncertain. The broken spoke sign at the entrance now bears both our names, not as a concession, but as a recognition that family, even flawed and fractured, remains the foundation that supports us through the hardest seasons. Looking back now, as I stand on the ridge overlooking the spring lambing fields, I realize what my father was trying to teach us all along. The stuffed lamb that traveled from my hands to Meredith's and back again wasn't just a toy. It was the embodiment of our shared history, the good and the bad. Family legacies aren't just about land or money. They're about the stories we tell ourselves and the truths we're willing to face. Sometimes you have to lose everything to understand what really matters. Meredith and I still disagree on plenty. She wants to expand into lamb meat production, while I'm focused on improving our breeding stock. But we've learned that the strongest fences are the ones we build together. If there's someone in your life you've written off as lost to you, remember that beneath the hurt and history, there might be a path back to each other you haven't discovered yet. Sometimes it takes losing a $4 million ranch to gain something far more valuable. If you found something worthwhile in my story, hit that subscribe button for more real-life family dramas and the lessons they taught me. And leave a comment below about a time when losing something led you to a greater gain. Thanks for listening to this chapter of my life. I'll see you in the next one.